Jesse L. Lasky, Hollywood's forgotten founder. Hi, I'm Richard Niles of First Films. Producer-director Alex Tweddle and I are working on creating a unique new streaming series, Whatever Happened to Hollywood? The memoirs of screenwriter Jesse Lasky Jr. In this video, I'd like to tell you about his father. His daughter, Betty, called him Hollywood's forgotten founder, and he's certainly not a well-known name. There's a street in Beverly Hills near the intersection of Santa Monica and Wilshire called Lasky Drive. But it wasn't because he produced over 1,000 films. It was named for him because of his role in the Beverly Hills Speedway. Jesse L. Lasky's life is a story of extremes, triumph and tragedy, stellar achievement and abject failure. In 1927, his worth was estimated at $20 million, about $370 million in today's money. The epitome of a movie mogul, he had built the first tennis court, the first swimming pool in town. But the man had a unique personality. Although he was the most powerful man in Hollywood during the heyday of the silent film, he was still described as likable Lasky and the man without an enemy. Even though he and his son Jesse had serious arguments from time to time, they spent as much time as they could together. Time and again in Jesse's diaries you read that after an exhausting day's work for Cecil B. DeMille, Jesse would meet his dad for dinner or just go relax with him at their beach house. Jesse L. Lasky produced the first feature film in Hollywood, The Squaw Man, in 1913, and went on to produce over 1,000 films, including many acclaimed hits such as the first epic, The Covered Wagon, the groundbreaking Wings, featuring the first aerial battles. And there were hits like Sergeant York, Rhapsody in Blue, The Adventures of Mark Twain, and The Great Caruso. He discovered and developed the careers of many stars, such as Gary Cooper, Carole Lombard, Rudolph Valentino, Bing Crosby, Marie Chevalier, and Mae West. Lasky could be said to have invented the movie business in Hollywood and gave Cecil B. DeMille and Sam Goldwyn their start in it. Yet, the genial, polite showman, so full of love for his family, for art, and the artists who created it, was ultimately destroyed by his love for a heartless business. Called the first gentleman of Hollywood, Jesse Lasky was born in San Francisco, September 13th, 1880. He always took pride in being the native son of a native son of California. His father, shoe store proprietor Isaac Lasky, was born in Sacramento, where his Polish grandfather had settled in 1848 after a covered wagon crossing on the Oregon Trail. Growing up in San Jose, Jesse learned to play the cornet and imagined he would be discovered by John Philip Sousa. Well, Sousa never heard him. In 1899, the adventurous and fearless young man followed his hero Jack London to Nome, Alaska, after the gold rush. He never struck gold, so he had to work as a stagehand in a burlesque show. The dancers used to put gold dust on their breasts, so when some dust would inevitably fall on the stage, Lasky would brush it into a small pouch. In 1901, he sailed to Hawaii and became one of the few non-Hawaiians to play in the Royal Hawaiian Band. Returning home broke, his beloved sister, Blanche, had learned to play the cornet so that they could go into vaudeville, performing as a duo. They earned $50 a week at Shoot the Chutes Park. Their refined act, The Musical Laskys, was praised by one of the daily papers. Their mother, Sarah, sewed military costumes, crinolines, and colonial powdered wigs. Something of a stage mom, she composed letters and created a press kit. The only offer came from the Boston Music Hall, one of the finest theaters in the country. The Laskys left for Boston, where the older performers kindly helped newcomers, Lasky and Blanche, polish their act. They then moved to New York to be managed by the William Morris Agency. Finally, they performed at Tony Pastor's, the goal of every vaudevillian. A young juggler named W.C. Fields was on the bill, and they became great friends. Herman the Great, whose show included magic, saw them at Pastor's and engaged them for a 40-week season tour as a curtain piece, an opening act. When Herman's manager became too alcoholic to work, Lasky took control for the second season, selling the cornet act to Ben Ralph and his wife Nellie. This was much more lucrative, aided by the brilliant business sense of Sister Blanche. Representing Herman and Ralph, Jessie rented office space in the Broadway Theater. Blanche ran the office while Jessie rushed off to Europe to book gigs for Herman. You see, Lasky was very different from most of the film moguls. Apart from being a native Californian, he was also highly educated, with a deep knowledge of history and a refined appreciation, some might call it an addictive fascination, with all of the arts. Show business? Well, it must be said he was a showman who wasn't particularly interested in the business, and that's where Blanche came in. Canny, clever, and sharp, she could recognize a crook before he walked in the door, making sure no one took advantage of her artistic, trusting brother. Dazzled by London and Paris, Lasky began thinking in bigger terms. Groups instead of individuals, production numbers staged in the continental manner, and enjoying producers' profits instead of an agent's commission. Needing more money to produce his grandiose ideas, Lasky approached Henry B. Harris, who leased and managed the Hudson Theater. Harris became a silent partner and offered offices in the theater. Lasky sent out about 40 acts between 1906 and 1910, with Blanche indispensable as a production assistant, even designing costumes and helping develop other acts. The money rolled in and they opened a branch office in Chicago for William Morris, scouting for new acts. There, Lasky signed a young singer, Al Jolson. He didn't think Jolson had a particularly good voice, but he was moved by Jolson's exceptional sincerity. When Jolson walked into the office to sign the contract, he saw that Lasky had just been delivered a beautiful new checkered suit. He was fascinated by it, and once he'd signed his contract, he asked if Lasky would sell it to him. "All right," said Lasky, "I'll sell it to you for $60, what I paid for it." Jolson happily picked it up, saying, "Great, I'll send you 6 sawbucks out of my first week's salary." He never paid the money, and years later they were playing golf at the Hillcrest Country Club. Lasky mentioned the suit, and Jolson offered to play golf for it. As Lasky later wrote, "So I lost my suit a second time." A few more years later, and Lasky was producing Rhapsody in Blue. He asked Jolson to sing Swanee in the film, and when Jack Warner offered Jolson payment of $25,000, Jolson refused it, saying, "I did this as a personal favor to Jessie, the man who started my career." But the success of vaudeville made him overconfident. This led to the loss of Lasky's first fortune when he mounted the Folies Bergère, a lavish Broadway theater restaurant he built with Henry B. Harris. Well, America wasn't ready for this level of sophisticated entertainment. It failed after 4 months. But perhaps it was a lucky failure because Lasky's destiny lay elsewhere. In 1909, he was living with Blanche and their mother Sarah in a rambling apartment at 61st and Broadway in New York. Lasky had a unique dress sense, of its time but slightly raffish. Pince-nez glasses, high collars, tailored suits. On holiday at Long Lake in the Adirondacks, one afternoon at a tea dance, the fastidiously dressed Lasky peered through his pince-nez glasses and saw an ethereal beauty seated with her mother and a suitor. It was Bessie Ginsberg, with gigantic brown eyes, auburn hair, and the face of an angel. He became completely entranced by her spiritual air of innocence and sweetness. When their eyes met, Lasky walked over and asked her to dance. Although she was actually at a table with her mother and a suitor, Bess took the hand of this elegant young man. While they danced, Lasky asked her to climb the mountain with him the following day. By the end of their hike, the soft-spoken and gentle Jessie had asked her to marry him, and she accepted. Bess was Jewish but had been educated at a Catholic convent school and had just graduated from Boston Conservatory, studying to be a concert pianist. The Laskys were Jews by heritage rather than in practice. Bess and Jessie were both more spiritual than denominational, and they were married very quickly in Boston. After a short honeymoon, the workaholic Lasky sailed for Europe with Blanche to find new vaudeville acts. Their son Jesse was born in 1910. Now Sam Goldfish had been one of Bessie's previous suitors. A wealthy Polish glove merchant, Bessie had rejected the rough and rather uncouth Sam in favor of the refined and charming Jessie. Sam was polite but very upset. The gracious Bess even invited Sam to their wedding. There he met Jessie's sister, Blanche. He offered to marry her, and she accepted. Sam seemed sincere, and he was very wealthy. Now, even though she was an expert in managing Jessie's productions, Blanche didn't enjoy show business. She actually saw Sam's wealth as a way of her getting out of show business. Once married, Sam moved into the Lasky home. Now, Sam was fascinated with the flickers shown in Nickelodeons all over New York. He started pushing Jessie to produce these 30 to 60-second films, which were making healthy profits. Lasky repeatedly rejected the idea, telling Sam, "It's just a peep show, low-class entertainment. I produce vaudeville and theater. Story is everything, and you can't tell a story in 2 reels." Well, no one could foresee at that time that vaudeville would die and that it was the movies that would kill it. Walking down Broadway one day, Lasky saw a sign advertising Mission Coffee and devised an idea for an operetta called California. He approached respected playwright William DeMille, but his mother, Mrs. H.C. DeMille, also his agent, told Lasky, "Oh, he's too busy, but you should try his talented brother, Cecil." Jessie saw in Cecil a jack of all trades in the theater with a short record of failures. But they met, and as they spoke, he became more comfortable with him, eventually telling him his idea for the operetta. And when Cecil smiled and said, "I like that," Jessie began to like him. The friendship between Lasky and DeMille was immediate and electrifying. They inspired and excited each other with shared dreams and planned adventures. The two became brothers for life. They worked together on many projects. DeMille later wrote, "The world was new to him every morning, for Jessie's life was a sparkling road full of unknown curves, round any of which might lie untold adventure." Well, Sam was still nagging Lasky about the flickers, and he rejected the idea again. But then Lasky saw The Great Train Robbery and became interested in the possibilities of motion pictures. He became even more interested when he saw Adolph Zucker's Queen Elizabeth, starring Sarah Bernhardt. Meeting DeMille at the New York theatrical watering hole Lamb's Club for lunch, Cecil told Jessie he was broke and bored and he wanted adventure. He had decided to go to Mexico, where there was a revolution underway. Well, Jessie, wanting to save his friend from getting shot, said, "You want adventure, Cecil? Let's do something even more dangerous. Let's make a full-length motion picture." DeMille thought for a moment, thrust his hand out, and said, "Yes, let's!" Well, they needed a star, and they looked around the restaurant. They approached the tall and handsome Dustin Farnham, sitting at a nearby table, knocking back copious amounts of champagne. Well, he agreed to do it for an enormous amount of money, but only if they could get his favorite play, The Squaw Man. They saw the play's writer, Edwin Milton Royal, at another table. They rushed over to him, and he agreed to sell them the rights for even more money. As Lasky and DeMille walked out of Lamb's Club, Jessie said, "Well, Cecil, we've got some money to raise. Let's go tell Sam we're in the movie business." Well, in part 2, we'll look at the glory days of the Lasky Company. I'm still Richard Niles, and I'll see you there.
Whatever happened to